Hello guys, my name is Spiros Katsos and today we're going to see how we can add to the Fluent Validations API so we can have our custom validations in our application. Let's go to our project. I have a customers API. If I go to the Nugget package, I have already added Fluent Validations and the Fluent Validation Dependency Injection extension so we can register our validators. In my program.cs I add my validators from the assembly. In there you can always specify the lifetime. For example, let's set it to singleton. Okay, and I have a create customer request. It's just a record with a first name, a last name, an email address and a zip code. And I have in the same file for simplicity a create customer request validator, and all you need to do to validate an object is to have a class that extends from the abstract validator of the type of object that you want to validate. And in the constructor of this class you add some validation rules. As you can see, if you're not familiar with it, the Fluent validation has a very good Fluent API. For example, I can say rule for email address dot email address, and there are a ton of other options in this package, but maybe we have some custom logic that we want to implement. Let's say that for example I have a zip code and I want that zip code to has a length of 5 and all the characters should be digits. So we can say in here, using the Fluent Validations API, to build that rule. You can say, for example, rule for zip code length, using again the Fluent Validations API, let's say 5 with message, because we can define the message that will be returned every time. So with message, let's say zip code must have a length of 5. Okay, and in here we can use the must extension method, in which we can specify our own function to validate the property. We're going to talk about that in a second, but for now let's say that we want our string, because our email is a string, or characters to be digits. So char is digit, with message zip code must be digit or something, must be digits. Okay, now we have it in our create customer request validator, but maybe we have a lot of other validators that we want to validate the zip code, so we can always extract that. And let me show you what I mean. I will create another class. I will call that it will be a static class. I will call that validation extensions. So validation extensions. Okay, and in here I will have a public static void. I will call that validate zip code, and that will be an extension method to the iRule builder. If we can show in our email address, that's a built-in validation rule, and I go in here, as you can see, it's also an extension method to this iRule builder of t and string, because it expects a string for the email. So we can do the same. We can say this iRule builder of t and that will be a string, and let's call that rule builder. And we can say rule builder, and let's copy all that and actually cut it and paste it in here. And now in the zip code all we need to say is dot validate zip code, and we will have the expected behavior. And now we can test that. I have a customer's controller in which I inject an iValidator of create customer request, and I have a post and point, and inside it I just take a validation result by calling the validateAsync method of the validator that I have injecting, and I pass the create customer request, and then if the validation result is valid I return OK, and if it's not valid I return a bad request with the validation errors. Now obviously this could be an action filter, or we can have another validator or one instead of this in a lower level, for example inside of our services or in a mediator pipeline, and we can always have it in a more abstract way in these scenarios where we scan our project to get the validators that dedicated to the type of each request, but there's a lot of documentation about that, so I'm not going to focus on that more. Anyway, let's go and debug our application. I'll open Postman. I have already a request. I have a first name Spiros, last name Katsios, an email address spiros@gmail.com, and I have a valid zip code. First of all, let's see the built-in validation for the email. Let's remove the @ and if I hit send, as you can see, we get a bad request, and it says that for the email address, the email address is not a valid email address. So if I go and put back that @ and I send it, I get an OK. And now let's make the zip code have a length of 4, and let's send a request. As you can see, zip code must have a length of 5, and if I put a letter, it says zip code must be digits. So let's put that one back, and we get again 200 OK. Okay, now let's say for example that we can't create a customer with an email that another customer already has. So I have a customer repository with an exist async method to mimic a real asynchronous method of a real repository, and I have that exist async method that accepts a string, and I hard coded if the email is equal to spiros@mail.com return true, otherwise return false, and I have registered that repository with its interface as scoped. So to validate that, we need the way to inject that repository. So it's actually very simple. It's similar as you would do in any other part of your application. All we need to say is to have a private read-only iCustomer repository. Let's call that repository, and we just initialize that through the constructor, and now we have access to our repository. So remember previous that we saw that the mass extension method. Now let's dive a little bit more into that. So I will say rule 4, and we need the email address. So I'll say for email address, but we can easily pass the whole request, and I'll say must async, and again that accepts now an asynchronous function, as the must accepts a synchronous function that will return true or false. So let's go outside of the constructor, and let's have a private async task of bool. Let's call that unique email, and then we will accept the email, and we can also have a cancellation token, so let's do that also. And let's take the result of the customer repository. So await customer repository.exists async, and let's pass the email, and we need to negate that, because if it exists it's not a unique email, and if it does not exist it is a unique email. Okay, in that must async method, all we need to pass is that function. So let's say unique email, and that's it. But we also need to be careful for one more thing. Remember in the program.cs that I set the service line to singleton. That was okay if I only had my previous validation rules, but now I am depending on a customer repository that's registered as scoped. So my validators can be registered as singleton, so I'll just remove that service lime.singleton, and the default lifetime of add validations from assembly extension method is scoped, so everything should be alright. So let's debug that again. Let's open Postman, and I'll remove that G so it's spiros@mail.com. I'll send my request, and I get an error message saying that the specified condition was not met for email address, and that's the default error message we get if we don't specify something else in a must or a must async extension method. So that's actually not descriptive enough. So let's fix that. Let's go back to our validator, and let's say with message email already exists. Let's debug that one more time. Let's send the same request, and now as you can see the error message is email already exists, and if I set that again to Gmail we get a 200 OK. And that's all I had for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. If you want to see something else about Fluent validation or validations in general, let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching and have a nice one.